All right, thank you very much, Beth, and thank you all for coming this evening. As Beth mentioned, my name is Kyle Bagnall. Give you a short background of myself here and how this whole thing came to be. I'm a Michigander, a multi-generation Michigander going way back, and I first started my association with Mackinac as a Boy Scout. I was involved with the Mackinac Island Scout Service Camp from 1984 through '89. I walked into a position at the fort there. I was an interpreter at Fort Mackinac for 5 seasons and got my degree in public history from Western Michigan University. So I spent most of my career doing environmental history in Midland, Michigan. I worked for Chippewa Nature Center, and we had a homestead farm and log schoolhouse and Native American wigwam and all of that sort of thing. And then I spent some time at Dow Gardens in Midland as well with a canopy walk to help open that up. It's this elevated walkway that goes through the forest. And then at Mackinac, my predecessor, Jeff Dykehouse, who hired me originally in 1990, finally retired after 36 years. So when his job came open, I applied for it. Coming back to Mackinac would be my dream come true. And then COVID hit and they shut all hiring down for the state of Michigan. So it was a little bit delayed, but it ended up being here. So this will be my 4th season as supervisor at Mill Creek and as park naturalist. I've got a book coming out this spring, A Natural History of Mackinac Island, called The Wonders of Mackinac. So it's going to be a great year, and we're literally just having our staff arrive and opening things up as we speak. So my association with this topic, you will find out kind of as we go along here. It all ended up kind of formulating when I ran across one of his poems on the back of a book that was a guide to Mackinac Island from 1926. I'm like, who wrote that? And then this Ivan Swift wrote that. Well, who's that? And then found out this whole other side of his association with the island and his Mackinackers lectures and so forth. And you'll see other associations as well. Now, I also realized that I'm in Harbor Springs, and some of you may be related to Ivan Swift, or knew him or his family, or have a place at Chippewa Cove Woods, and have other details that I have not uncovered. Once you start digging into something like this, the topic is always much too large for it to encapsulate it all in an hour talk, but I'm happy to give it a good shot here and do my best. So, when you see a review like this, how can you not be interested in the person it's talking about? Ivan Swift is a Lake Superior breeze, a northern Michigan forest, the heart of the people, invigorating, picturesque, human. And that was a review of the Mackinackers lecture and recital that he gave. And this is Jesse Phelps, who's a professor at the University of Michigan. So we're going to kind of just do a chronological timeline about Ivan and his family. And yes, that's his little house there that you'll see more of. So here, these are some of the descriptions that I ran across of Ivan Swift over my research. And these are only some of the many things that he was called, including a marginal heartthrob, charming conversationalist, no ordinary hobo, a dreamer husband, a great feller, and definitely poet of the North, kind of being the most prominent of them all. But that and so many other things, so many facets to him. And really, the more and more I learned about him, the more I felt akin to him. My love of nature and of history and of the native cultures in Michigan all ring very true to me as well. So Ivan defined himself, and if you know of him and his work, you may have run across this as well, his 7 Ps. So he called himself a poet, a painter, a printer, a preacher, a patriot, and a poor man's politician. So I won't say a peanut politician, but he usually referred to it as a poor man's politician. And these graphics came from an article that was about him in a newspaper in the 1920s. So we will kind of look at each of these facets and others as we wind our way through the story of his life. So first, I'd like to actually start by looking back at a little bit about his family history, and it's really amazing to see how his ancestors really make up these whole multifaceted interests that he had, and how some of that family line comes through in his writings and works of his life. So Ivan was born June 24th, 1873 in Nankin Township, which is right here. So this is in the greater Detroit area, just west of Detroit there, Wayne County. And these are his parents, Jenny Burge and John Swift. And he wrote multiple things about his childhood, and he sums it up saying, "I was born on a muck farm and the music of bullfrogs and the perfume of onions." So I kind of looked up where exactly the farm was, and on this 1876 map you can see J. Swift, that's his father's property, and G.W. Swift, those two pieces are his grandfather's land right there. And today, that is a golf course. It is the Mac Mayfield Municipal Golf Course, and I bet you there's still bullfrogs in that pond that you can see right there on the bottom. So he was born in 1873. They lived here for a while. They moved somewhere near the River Rouge, a little downriver. He went to a country schoolhouse and just got basically the first inkling years of his life there before they headed north to northern Michigan. And that was because of his father, who's fascinating, and every person I met I wanted to learn more about, and I could only had so much time. But John Putney Swift lived from 1844 to 1912. He was a graduate of Michigan Agricultural College, which is Michigan State University. He got his master's of botany in 1868. So pretty impressive, and it's quite a long time ago. He was a surveyor, especially by trade. He was also a landscape gardener. In fact, I saw one time while he was living here at Harbor Springs, he was hired by Northville, Michigan to landscape their cemetery. So he went back downstate and filled that contract, among many other things that he did in his life, and we'll take a look at some of those here in a minute. His father was George Washington Swift, so you can see the word patriot that Ivan used. The family must have been quite patriotic. He was born in Palmyra, New York. You'll see that the Swifts actually founded Palmyra, New York. He was born in 1817 and died in Northville, Michigan in 1885. He was a carpenter by trade, but especially he was a politician. He was an abolitionist. The family was very abolitionist. He was a congressman on the state legislature of Michigan. He's also a U.S. consul to Windsor, Ontario for some time. And there's a portrait of him that's owned by the state of Michigan, and I couldn't track it down, but it's either at the Historical Society or the State Capitol Building. His father was Reverend Marcus Swift, and this is who came to Michigan. Remember, Ivan also called himself a preacher, and Reverend Marcus Swift was also a fervent abolitionist. He immigrated in 1825 to Michigan, the year that the Erie Canal opened. He was a Methodist minister, and you can see the congregation that he founded at historic Greenmead in Livonia today. This is the church. And he broke with the Methodist Church in 1841 because their stance on abolition wasn't strong enough. So he was serious about this. And that's kind of radical religion kind of will play forth in Ivan's life as well over the years. This historic marker is by the new church. The old historic church had been moved to Greenmead. Now we go back, this is the last person we're going to go back to, but his father, so Ivan's great-great-grandfather was General John L. Swift. And talk about patriot. He started in Connecticut, was a Revolutionary War veteran. He was a Pennamite Yankee War veteran, and I'll explain that in a moment. Founded Palmyra, New York, and it was a War of 1812 soldier. And it says he was killed in battle, but it was kind of an assassination, and I'll kind of describe that. So there's a great historical marker after John Swift in Palmyra. So he says here he founded the town in 1790, actually arrived in 1789, and his actual military coat is on display at the Wayne County Museum in Lyons, New York. Now this Pennamite Yankee War is perhaps a war of Michigan history or U.S. history that you've not heard of. It was eastern Pennsylvania. Right around the Revolutionary War time, you had colonists kind of arguing with each other as well. Multiple states had land claims, including Virginia and Connecticut, in the current state of Pennsylvania. settlers were moving in, they were getting land deeds from like the state of Connecticut, and Pennsylvania said, well, we own that, you can't have the deed, and then they were fighting. There's 3 different times that violence broke out. And Captain Swift, at that point, was highly involved with that and led militia companies from Connecticut to go out and fight against Pennsylvania settlers. People were kidnapped, people were killed, they were thrown in prison, all these horrible things happened, and it forced some Connecticut people, or Yankees as they called them, to leave. And the Swifts were one of those families that left the area because of that, and that's how they ended up in upstate New York. So we're looking at kind of upstate New York here, the Finger Lakes region. You can see the Pennsylvania line down at the bottom. Another family that was associated with the Swifts at that time was the Kilbourne family. They also got thrown into prison, and they were some of his soldiers, if you will, during that war. And Aaron Kilbourne writes about a specific event with Captain John Swift, whereas if they weren't a little more careful, there would have been no Ivan Swift or entire Swift line. So let me just briefly read it to you. In the fall, Captain John Swift came with a large boat and took my father and his family on board and went up to Newton Point. So right here on the river down at the bottom. In January 1789, I went with Captain Swift to Catherinetown, situated at the head of Seneca Lake. On our way, we had to draw our boat 3 miles over the ice. And after reaching the water, our mast became displaced, the boat nearly filled with water, and we were compelled to go ashore, build a fire, and dry our clothes. Kind of a harrowing incident for sure. And then on reaching Geneva, I found my brother Timothy at work on a sawmill, and the Swifts had grist mills. He gave me a suit of clothes, and I remained with him through the winter. So John Swift kept going. He went to Palmyra, New York that same year. And Aaron Kilbourne, who was my 5th great-grandfather, went with his family to Niagara and then to Canada, and they came into Michigan through that way into Detroit. So I was shocked to find that my great-grandfather wrote this whole account about Ivan Swift's 2nd great-grandfather, and they were riding around together, hauling their boats over the ice, and involved with these Pennamite-Yankee wars. The tangled webs of history. So now we're getting back to the Swift family. So Ivan and his family, remember they moved to River Rouge for a little while, but then some opportunities came further north. So in 1880, John Swift came up to Harbor Springs to plat out Harbor Point. So it was founded in 1878. This is a picture from about 1875. You can see the point swirling around there, and he was a surveyor by trade, so he surveyed many things. Another thing he did is, a few years after that, he came back and he collected plants. Remember, he was a botanist by trade. They were living not too far from Belle Isle, which was just then becoming a park, and he got a contract to collect 70,000 plants, package them up, and send them back to Belle Isle to be planted for the park. And this is a map, this shows an early map of Belle Isle. And it says here that the mother and all the 4 boys helped in collecting these plants. There were 5 boys, but 1 wasn't born yet. So that's why 4 boys were helping. She's not born yet either. So we'll get there. So this newspaper article mentions that incident, and I thought it was really fun. It's from 1883. John Swift, the surveyor and landscape gardener, is engaged on a big contract of supplying roots and bulbs and wildflowers to be set out in Belle Isle Park at Detroit. He's already sent 46,000 plants, which will come down to about $700. Mr. Swift has a fine farm this side of Cross Village with good soil, splendid view of the lake, and free from frost, which he is now offering for sale cheap. Surveyors did a lot of land sales. When he was back and forth between Detroit and Harbor Springs, they usually stayed at the Emmett House Hotel. There's many accounts of them in the newspaper coming to the Emmett House. I don't know where it was. I'm sure Beth knows where it was.
Bay Street.
And they had a little house up on the bluff, and then they moved, well, before they moved, he was kind of bopping around town as an agent for the Northern Michigan for the Subscription Book Company. And he did this for many years. So if you want to buy a stack of encyclopedias, well, I've got a deal for you. So one of them was this Universal History, and there are many others that this publisher put out. Chilton and Company, and that you'll see many times, even on his business card. And this is one of those things that Beth has in her collection. You see he's a landscape and practical surveyor, designer of Harbor Point Resorts, also agent for lands and standard subscription books. These are just a few ads in the newspapers, basically advertising that he's got lands for sale. He worked as basically an agent for other people who own lands. He bought some lands. He ended up kind of in debt sometimes because he would get loans and try to resell land and so forth, but he was very active in many things. He also plotted out Roy Brook Resort just east of town here, and this is a map in his hand from 1902. And here's a woodland scene there. Look at the trees. Isn't that fantastic? Here's a woodland scene. This is from a publication from 1903. Here are the Swift boys. So, and I'm going to kind of go through and say who they all are. And this is taken right down near the entrance to Harbor Point. George Henry is the one on the far left. He was born in 1871, so just a couple years older than Ivan. He was an architect, a builder, and a surveyor. In fact, most of them did some surveying work. Herbert, Ivan, and he just called himself Ivan. Most of them went by their middle names, which was very common back then. An artist and poet and all those other wonderful things. Also did some surveying, which you'll see. Marcus, or Mark, was a farmer. Burge was a medical doctor, and he ended up being down somewhere near Grand Rapids. I can't remember the exact location, but he was very successful. And Albert Thorne, who actually died fairly young, was a teacher. He was a math teacher for a while down in Lansing. He also was involved with the Ottawa Lumber Company. That was his main source of income. And when he passed away in 1922, his wife became vice president of the Ottawa Lumber Company. He was also postmaster of Harbor Springs, and we'll need another one of those as well. And there's Sarah, or Dorothy. She was a trained nurse, but then she married a medical doctor, so she didn't have to work anymore. And she is the one who outlived all her brothers and lived until 1956. All right, so this map from the same year, 1902, shows Harbor Springs and Harbor Point, and right where that star is where the Swifts ended up moving to. And they first had a little place on the bluff, but they had land right out near the entrance of Harbor Point. Here's the plot. You see it's in Jenny's name there, and there's a couple little pieces there. They built the house about 1886, so just a few years after they were doing all that plant collecting. I'd also like you to pay attention to this piece of land over here on the left. It says C.N. Saunderson. It's actually C.W. Sanderson, and he was a Boston artist that helped do some of the early training of Ivan in art. So they lived down the street, so pretty handy. He taught classes, and we'll see a picture of him in a bit. So Ivan wrote, this is Cross Village, yes, he wrote many times about his influences when he was young, and one of his descriptions here said, "My first view of this country was from the bluffs at Cross Village when I was 9 years of age. I could not have been convinced that I did not see all I looked upon." And you have to kind of think about that, but I love that. He's talking about a deep history there. He's talking about a deep sense of place, really knowing some place. You just look at a place and you say, oh yeah, I've seen it. But no, he's talking about going deep in that very simple little sentence. And he talks a lot more about that throughout his writings. And then one of the, this occurs, the story comes up many times, but some way his father sent him 17 miles north of Harbor Springs to squat on a homestead. So Ivan had to go up there when he was fairly young, do some work, and we weren't actually homesteading. He purchased the land, but he was put to work. So he was out there, and he said that he got some books out of the library, was kind of introduced to poetry, and just kind of absorbed the North Woods. And this description, this is that other part of that same picture there in Cross Village. Here the blood of the northern sunsets, the balsam balm, and even the blackberry briars got in his veins. The traditions of Indian, habitant, and settler were his fairy stories. And being a daydreamer by nature, this region of romance and adventure was meat and drink to him. Here in a squatter shack on a bed of corn cobs and a horse blanket, he wrote his first poem by the light of a broken lamp. So, like all things about poetry, or artists and poets, you have to believe about half of it. But But it's just a romantic way to describe that very formative experience when he was young. And he just soaked it all in and just loved meeting people. I just heard here a few minutes ago how outgoing and vivacious he was and wanted to talk with everyone and learn everything and take in his surroundings. He mentioned that he started writing poetry about 14 years of age. The early ones, he says, being generally addressed to some girl. And he graduated from Harbor Springs High School in 1892. And this is the old building there. And then he also received some early art instruction from C.W. Sanderson. I'm doing it now. He was from Boston. He bought a cottage in Harbor Springs here, built one in 1892, and spent many summers here, and he had summer classes for pupils. And Ivan was just down the street, so he must have, well, it says that he received early instruction from him, as well as others, but it was a very easy way to get introduced to him and to the world of art. For just 1 year, he attended Petoskey Normal Business College. Ever since I agreed to do this talk, every time I drive by the building, I see it, and I think of Ivan Swift being in there. Didn't like it apparently, didn't stay very long. Burge went there also, perhaps all the brothers did, but I know for sure that Burge did before he went off to medical school. And you can see right in the very left is dark. It was founded in 1888, and he attended just for a year in 1895. He also spent some time in a lumber camp, Camp Kijik, and while here he wrote lumberjack songs, which found a ready audience and publishers in New York. And this is a lumber scene from near Cross Village. It's not that particular camp. It was here in northern Michigan when it was really wild that Mr. Swift gathered his Indian legends, material for his Indian poems, and also for the book Mackinackers, which he is working on now. You spend a few months with the lumberjacks in a lumber camp, and you're going to learn a lot. Not everything you can write home to your mother. All right, now Chicago. So his world really begins to expand when he trains at the Art Institute in Chicago. So he leaves the small town of Harbor Springs, a small country school down near River Rouge, and he attended there for 3 years. Apparently, perhaps because his father went into debt at times with some land he bought, he didn't really have much money to pay for school, so he enrolled in the ROTC to help pay for it. Unfortunately, a war broke out. So the Spanish-American War broke out, and Ivan Swift was with the 1st Illinois Volunteer Cavalry from April 26 to October 25th, 1898. So they mustered in at Springfield, Illinois. They left there May 30th to go to Chickamauga, Georgia. Some things you'll read about says that Ivan went to Cuba during the war. This unit never left Georgia during the war, so he was in Georgia. But the main thing is they were struck with typhoid fever. And quite a few people in this company died. He was listed as being sick in quarters from August 24th to the 30th in the line of duty. This, from the Chicago Tribune, is depicting the sick men of the 1st Illinois Cavalry arriving at Fort Sheridan, where they mustered out. So technically it could be depicting Ivan, because as he was traveling, this was published. He arrived in Chicago the day this was published, in August 27th. And typhoid is from drinking bad water, so the camp sickness, popular in the Civil War and very common in the Civil War as well. So, and then the entire unit, probably because so many of them were sick, went on furlough for about a month, and then they mustered out at the end of October. And he didn't have to go see any battle action, but it was really a formative part of his experience. Again, he was a patriot. He came from a family of patriots, and he was proud that he was involved with that. So the Art Institute of Chicago, this is an advertisement for the art school that's there, and they covered all sorts of things: drawing, painting, illustration, architecture, sculpture, decorative design. This is 1899 now, so the following year. And he is among the Pollywog Club members, displaying some daring canvases. This is the end of December of 1899. The Art Students League exhibition at the Art Institute has attracted much attention and has called forth much favorable comment the past week. Youth counts for much in art. Nothing which transpires in a year's course is so interesting to the art lovers as this showing of first efforts or early efforts, for some of these artists are now among the arrived. I do not say that these paintings are the best ones, but they are the most interesting. Youth is daring, impertinent, and original. Some joker may hint that the things are too fresh, then let them be. I.H. Swift's painting, Michigan Landscape, though in oils, might easily be mistaken for a watercolor, as the paint is thinly laid and threads of canvas show. There's no law to the amount of paint one shall use. The picture is very good, indeed, and fine in color. It appears to be a wide waste of sand, sky, and something along the horizon. Mystery, atmosphere, and good tones go far in picture making. So this picture is from 1902. They describe something that looks very much like this, so it may have been an early copy or something very similar of those sand dunes along the Lake Michigan shore. And you can see his monogram on the right. That's his monogram and signature changed many times over the years. It's an IS in this particular case. While in Chicago that same year, in fact, he began become an illustrator for Blue Sky magazine, and they had a small press. He designed both of these covers for these magazines. You can see one of the little monograms down in the corner, the one on the left. He would eventually become editor of this magazine for a short time in 1903 and early 1904. I love this one. He designed the entire thing here, the short poem, and also the art for the November issue. And you can see the tiny little lizard, which is what he will use later on in his own press here in Harbor Springs. So that's a more recent version from the 1920s, decades later. He illustrated several books. So much like his own books of poetry, the Blue Sky Press had very limited editions. You can see this one, 333 copies for some reason. And he illustrated all of these, including the skull, which I thought was kind of cool. He came out with this poem called Charity in Blue Sky magazine in 1902, and he did this illustration as well. This is the same year he spent some time in New York with Nickel magazine. He received some more art instruction in New York from a couple of well-known artists and worked for the magazine as an illustrator and writer. This cover is a little earlier than when he was there, but these images are from things that he illustrated that were in the magazine. And all kinds of different styles, too. This brooding guy with his top hat on. You can see in that one in particular, Swift along the bottom, and the bottom left is H-I-S, Herbert Ivan Swift, and the top one's kind of hidden there. This poem, Robin-Sided Farm, about this little sad sheep, and this illustration appeared in the Nickel in January of 1902. And then he also designed, this is his last book that he designed for the Blue Sky Press in Chicago in March of 1903. And he designed the cover and also the inside illustrations for that. He also published in many, many different publications and magazines. And somewhere around 1900 or so, the Socialist Party of America was established in 1901. And labor issues in Chicago was the heart of labor unrest in the country, and like modern labor movements and so forth. And socialism was seen as a possible way to cure those ills. So he got involved with the Socialist Party. And this poem of his appeared in The Comrade in November of 1903. But he didn't last long with that because he traveled to expand his horizons yet again during the 1904 World's Fair, which was actually the exposition to commemorate the Louisiana Purchase. So his involvement with the fair melded with this effort to promote the resorts of northern Michigan. And this little book was put out in 1903, Where to Spend the Summer, Michigan Resorts on Little Traverse Bay. So you see all these towns at the bottom here, especially Petoskey and Harbor Springs. I illustrated all these different things people could do, the hotels they could come to. Here's a camp scene, here's a steamer Tapinaby on the beautiful inland route. My wife and I live up near Lansing, so that goes right through town there. I love those old steamships and wish they still went back and forth. So Harbor Springs and Petoskey each contributed $500 for this publication, and all the rest contributed $500 more. So they printed 14,500 copies and spread them all over the place. And as part of the scheme, it was said, the Little Traverse Bay room at the St. Louis Exposition was furnished, and Ivan Swift of Harbor Springs was sent there for the season to represent the resorts. Really amazing. So here he is, young Ivan. This is from a publication from the exposition. This is just a cover to show you what the resort's all about. You see the Native American in the back. And it's, again, commemorating the Louisiana Purchase, which had been 100 years prior to that. You'll see he wrote many articles about his time there. This is the Michigan building, so all the states had their own building. And inside the Michigan building was the Little Traverse Bay room. So there's a room devoted to the exhibit of Little Traverse Bay and the Northern Michigan resorts. And the furniture here is of special interest and beauty. Everything was designed specifically for the building. The World's Fairs were crazy. All this like palaces and huge, Chicago's another good example, huge monumental architecture would just pop up. And there's many pictures of this being constructed, but this is the only picture of the inside I could find. It's not of the Little Traverse Bay room specifically, but you can see the wooden banister and the fancy mantelpiece over there, and it was definitely something to see. The Gateway magazine was published in Detroit, and Ivan wrote an article called An Autocrat at the Fair. One of his writings about the fair and his experience there. One of the things he said is, the educational value of the exposition is beyond computation, and one who can't hold a don't care attitude toward the wonder that has been created for him will be content with a narrow horizon. He also, because he was involved with the forestry of Michigan, the first state forests in Michigan had been founded just 2 years prior to that near Grayling, and he was involved with the Michigan exhibit, the Palace of Forestry, Fish, and Game. That building is enormous. And there's a palace of agriculture, palace of machinery, and this one here is a forestry. I searched for many hours and could not find a picture of the Michigan exhibit in that building. This is a good example though. This one's from Brazil. Everything related to wood products. There's a really detailed description of Michigans and birch bark baskets hanging along the rafters and so forth, but I couldn't find a picture of it. This is the exhibit from Tennessee. To give you another example, look at how tall the ceiling is. It's like an airplane hangar. They're in blocks, and I actually found pictures of the blocks right next to the Michigan exhibit, but not the Michigan one. This one I like because it shows this water feature here, which happens to be leaking all over the floor. So, walking over to the agricultural pavilion for just a second, because I wanted to show you the word Michigan. So, this is Michigan's agricultural pavilion exhibit. So, I'm sure there are products from the Little Traverse Bay region in this as well. And a reporter from an eastern newspaper said to ask Ivan Swift to tell you about Michigan forests if you should stop at the exhibit. And he will weave you a tale that will rival any you have heard in its romantic quality. For Swift is both a painter and a writer. And that's a close-up of the agricultural exhibit in Michigan. You can see a wolverine stuck on top of it there. So another article of the Gateway talks about Michigan's new harvest, or a poet. It says, H. Ivan Swift's Michigan's poet of the woods, field, and shores has been in charge of the Little Traverse Bay Room at the World's Fair. He is more directly associated with the state's state forestry department. His home address is Harbor Springs. Mr. Swift's poetry, which has been printed from time to time in an ephemeral way, has gradually attracted the attention of the magazine editors. And it is but a question of a short time before this young man will have a national, if not international, reputation. In the case of Ivan Swift, the better class of critics discerns fineness of touch, spontaneity of spirit, delicacy of mind, masculine in strength, but feminine in discernment. And this is one of the poems that he wrote while at the fair, and this is the only version of this image that I could see. It's called In Michigan. Slow-yielding nymphs evade unpandered satyrs here, and sands unconquered laugh at man's invention. Bright clouds drive darker shadows, and the bay breeze bears heavy odors, odor offerings of ragged pine and spruce. The white birch single on the hillside, the hemlocks and I are friends in Michigan. Nature's fingers seem to play upon my strings in minor harmonies up here, where shells of convents shelter echoes only, and the last Indian has laid his flints and legends on the grave mound of the older time in Michigan. And he signed it, Michigan Building, World's Fair. So he expanded his horizon several times already. He went to Chicago. He went to St. Louis to the World's Fair. It was exposed. There's exhibits from all these different countries around the world and every state. And now he hops on board a cattle ship and he goes over to Europe in 1905. And this particular painting of his is called Fishing Boats on the Adriatic that he did in 1906. So he journeyed on a cattle ship to Europe. There's scant details of his entire time there. He spent 4 months traveling around and studying art. He mostly walked everywhere he went because he was very proud that he only spent $260 walking around Paris. He studied some art. He said he also studied engineering. I'm not sure exactly where, but one of the descriptions said he traveled all over the continent, walking as much as possible and learning the customs of the people through his intimate talks with the shopkeepers and people in the streets. And from what I could tell, he was not afraid to talk to anyone and everyone, and I'm sure he did. And in one of his writings, this is called The World at Your Door. It's an address he gave for high school alumni. So I have seen the Alps and the Pyrenees, London and Venice, the Black Forest and the castles of the Rhine. Little to warrant a boast, more than enough for a lesson. I have come back with one message, of which I am so sure that I have written it down in a quiet hour. The world is at your door. No matter where he went, no matter how far he went, he always came back to northern Michigan. He spent winters, eventually, down south in Louisiana or Georgia. He always came back to Michigan. He had a place in Detroit, always came back to Harbor Springs, always came back to that spot in northern Michigan, which was infused throughout his entire works, all his poetry and his paintings. He did other things as well, but his main focus and his renown came from his connection with nature. He also got married, briefly. Now, you're going to say, who's that guy? Well, that's his wife, and a little bit later date, and her second husband. It did not last very long. In fact, it says here, first they filed for divorce August 30th, 1908. They were married for about 6 months. And it says, in 6 months, she gave her $4. So she studied and became a trained nurse, and now she asks for a divorce. Ivan Swift is a poet, an artist, and a lecturer, a charming conversationalist. His Pegasus feeds on the summer resort region of Michigan. He claims his kindred spirits and close friends, Edmund Markham, Stuart Edward White, George Sterling, Hamilton Mabel, and etc. Occasionally he runs for office on the socialist ticket, but his wife declares he's never made a living for her. Therefore, she seeks divorce. They both filed for divorce. So he filed for divorce in Emmett County, she filed for divorce in Los Angeles, and apparently his divorce cleared a week before hers did. This is a full page of the Chicago Sunday Tribune. It was bad for him. Okay? Girls, do not marry a poet. So I'm not going to go throughout the entire article, but over here on the right, heed the advice of Mrs. Mabel Swift of Los Angeles, who says that during 6 years of wedded life, she received only 1/3 of a cent per day, a painting of our ideal home, and a quantity of temperament from her dreamer husband, H. Ivan Swift. Do not marry a poet was her warning when she was recently granted a divorce. So, it did not last. In other publications later in life, you clearly see that Ivan was never married. I think he just wanted to forget about it and did not really advertise that later in life. So I chose this image next because he looks kind of sad, kind of young, forlorn. In fact, he did something kind of crazy, and this is right during the time where he's still married, is he joined something called the Tomorrow Colony. Now, I've never heard of this, but it's pretty wild. So, it was founded by Parker H. Sercombe. For one of the things, he promised to teach his guests how to live for 200 years. He was a champion bicycle rider and won all these races and so forth, and promised everyone everything, and was very charming, and basically ran a cult. His place in the colony in Chicago was basically run like a utopian colony. There were bunks in a huge room. People would sleep there, all mixed together. They would talk about socialist issues and so forth. Many different poets and writers, including Jack London, Albert Hubbard, and Carl Sandburg, visited. They actually had their own magazine, Tomorrow Magazine. I highlight this: shocks. Every marriage is a trial marriage. Now be shocked. So I would probably resonated with that one. And there's other things about Theodore Roosevelt and on and on and on. But Ivan printed poetry in this magazine from August 1906 to December 1907. So only a couple of years, but it was critically important that he kind of arrived at that time and kind of figured things out. So this is one of his poems, After the Troublous Winds, that was published in 1906. But the main thing he did there is he published his first book, Faggots of Cedar, in 1907. And you can see right along the bottom, designed and printed by the author, AD 1907, at the Tomorrow Press, and issued from their shop in Hyde Park, Chicago. And I found all these great descriptions of the Tomorrow Colony and so forth, but don't have time to go into it. But he designed, hand set, and illustrated it. One of his friends basically bound it for him. The first edition contained 23 poems and 6 illustrations, including photographs. All the other editions of his poetry did not contain illustrations, so you have to find the original 1907 version to get the illustrations. And this picture of men fishing is one of those that he took. And he credited 9 other periodicals that first published his work. So he had, again, sprinkling his writings around various magazines and so forth, binds them together here in this poem, or in this book, which is subtitled Out of the North and Blown by the Winds. And it was limited to 200 copies. So the original printing, the 1907, only 200 copies were printed. And that's kind of like the Blue Sky Press. Remember, they had very limited editions as well. So Edwin Markham, a very renowned poet of the time, was very favorable review for him. Said it is true that every line written by the staunch northerner has the delightful sting of the wind and the frost, which makes for strong lines rich in color and inspiration. Parker Sercombe threw a fit, and they had a huge public fight with one another. So this is where he says that Swift is no ordinary hobo. He is complex. He wrote in the Tomorrow Magazine that Swift ate, slept, and knocked here for 6 weeks, used our type, power, light, heat, help, press, name, played all the hell he could, and then flew. While here he was the living embodiment of a growl. Ill nature is his creed, and to sponge is his profession. Swift believes in cooperating on the other fellow's money, and he very scrupulously never showed the color of his own. In his line, he is the best trick we have ever turned. With a few half-talents, viz. Poet, painter, preacher, printer, all in reality protests against any real work, he was able to adjust himself to an attitude that makes him an effective troublemaker. On advising him of the terms on which we would print an advertisement and review of faggots, we recently received the following postal card and bill, both of which glow with novelty, if not talent. Dear Sercombe, I do not care for a review of Faggots of Cedar in the Tomorrow Magazine, as I do not pay for reviews. I shall send no books to you, as you have obtained from me under false pretense all that you will ever obtain under any pretense. My statement under separate cover. It is not for you to say what you will do. I will do this. Permit you to take in peace your chosen way to hell. One of the faithful, Swift. And this is the bill that he presented to Parker Sercombe. So the Tomorrow Publishing Company would owe to Ivan Swift 6 weeks of labor as printing expert, 200 copies of Faggots of Cedar that were spoiled by the press and pressmen, to advertising the book by imprint, to damage in violation of contracts, and to damage to reputation by personal contact, $5,000. Do you think Parker sent the money? The above is interesting, and it shows how a man can walk into your home, use you, abuse you, accept your hospitality and companionship, and then with brutal versatility find a way to justify himself. Swift, you are all right. Come again. So he did not go back. but it was a very amusing exchange printed in the Tomorrow magazine. Part of what he printed in Faggots of Cedar was the kind of precursor to what would become the Mackinackers and musicale. So this kind of very interesting blend of lecture, poetry, music, and it all comes after he leaves the Tomorrow colony, comes back to Michigan, and has to find a new place to land. So the second edition is published just a couple years later in 1909. He expands the title a bit, Out of the North Wood and Blown by the Winds and Ashes and Embers. And it includes new poems and ones contained in the original. And if you look at this, it's from the Willows shop near Clintonville, Oakland County, Michigan. Sold also by the author at Little Traverse Bay, 1909. Well, what is the Willows shop and where is Clintonville, Michigan? So, the Writer magazine in October of that year says that Ivan Swift, sometimes called Poet of the North, has established a printing and craft shop at the old Leggett home near Detroit. The first book out is a second and larger edition of his Faggots of Cedar, which has been favorably reviewed in this country and England. The old Leggett home. So there's a clue. Who are the Leggetts? And where is this at? So, what we have here is a slice of Waterford Township in Oakland County. At the bottom right, the railroad goes right out of town into Pontiac. That's just off the screen on the bottom right. If you zoom in here near Clintonville, you see M.A. Leggett, and that's the family homestead of the Leggett family who came at an early day to Michigan, right there on that beautiful pond or lake, all those lakes over Oakland County. And the matriarch of this family was Eliza Seaman Leggett, a fascinating woman, and one that I didn't know about, but more people should. And so that's why I'm going to tell you about. So she was born in 1915. She was a renowned abolitionist. She was involved with the creation of Belle Isle Park. She founded the Detroit Women's Club, which was a literary organization, and she worked closely with Sojourner Truth and Julia Ward Howe. Her house was a stop on the Underground Railroad in Michigan. She was friendly with Walt Whitman. She was neighbors with William Cullen Bryant before the family moved to Michigan. She was friendly with Louisa May Alcott and Ralph Waldo Emerson, among many others. She was really quite a lady. Her husband was Augustus Wright Leggett, and here's a picture of him, kind of a little sketchy picture, but it's the best I could find of him. And her granddaughter, their granddaughter, was May Leggett Abel. She was the director of the May Leggett Abel Violin School. So that's where really this tie comes together. Because the Leggetts and the Swifts, especially as they were both strident abolitionists in the greater Detroit area, must have had association with each other before the Swifts came north. This advertisement here is from the Bayview magazine saying that May is going to teach music lessons at Bayview in 1895. So pretty early, she actually was sent to Paris to the conservatory over there and completed the 4-year course in 2 years. She was very skilled violinist and musician, and she taught students for the summers up here. She married that same year the cellist Frederick Abel. He taught at the University of Michigan and Michigan State University, helped found the Detroit Conservatory, and just was an amazing musician as well. Her brother was also a musician. I mean, just their father was a fiddler as well. So somehow the Swifts and the Leggetts come up with this idea where Ivan will, as the poet of the North, I think it's going to come out. Ivan will read poetry, and others will play. It's a little loud. Let me just get it down a little bit. So others will play music as he does that. We didn't know how it was going to go, but this will be great. You're going to love it.
Fix us straight here.
It'll go back.
Oh, you want it there?
Yep. All right, now let's hear it again. So, the music by Will Leggett, which was May's brother, Frederick Abel, cello, Ella Berthold, cello and piano, and then Margaret Mannenbach on piano. Ivan Swift of Little Traverse Bay, poet, painter, traveler, soldier, and socialist, is so alone in his class as to almost be a curiosity. If you do not agree with his romantic outlook, he will still be better for his acquaintance. Can you turn it down? Let's see if she can turn it down on her end a little bit. So, he started doing these lectures throughout Detroit. Can you turn it down? Alright, I'll turn it down. Alright, just a second.
I control your microphone, but for some reason I can't control that.
Alright, I'll do that. Everyone, everything's okay. So he started. Just a second. There we go. Alright, so the Mackinackers and musical, with Ivan Swift in original readings, May Leggett, able violinist, Will Leggett, viola, and Ella Birdsall, cello. And it describes the Willow Shop more specifically in this particular article from 1909. It says the company's address, an ambitious country shop on the rural free delivery near Pontiac, Michigan, that deals in books, bindings, furniture, and fiddles. This Ivan Swift is getting heard about a good bit. He has the easy swing of a great man. He's the poet of the jackpines in the Mackinac land. He has a book of such things, Faggots of Cedar, that we've lately been reading with joy. It's a new note in the song of American life, struck from this genius of the Willow Shop. For a taste of Ivan Swift, read The Absent Heart of Me and the September Outlook. Edwin Markham and Hamilton May will say, new poet has arrived. Welcome to the Lyceum, Swift, and your tuneful three. All right, so a little break from the music. These are some of the selections that he probably read during that. I know actually more specific the musical selections that were done, and not exactly all of the poems that he read. But the recital was 2 hours long, so it was really long, and they did it as a grand presentation. So these are just some of the poems that are in Faggots of Cedar. Some of them deal with lumbering, some of them deal with the habitants and the coureur-de-bois, the Song of the Cedar Makers, a lumbering, and so forth and so on. And we'll see more of those as we go along. Okay. Here's the musical numbers, and I know how to turn this down, so I'll get this on. And they're all classical. So he's working with classical musicians, right? So you got these northern Michigan forest poems with this classical music, like Spring Song by Mendelssohn, The Rosary, so on and so forth. Schumann is in there as well. The only one kind of criticism, almost criticism that I saw was in the Normal College News, Ypsilanti, in 1910. If one might make a suggestion, it would be that the song of the Indian melodies and the songs of the habitant and lumberjack would still further heighten the effect of the northern atmosphere, if such can be found. But nevertheless, a very unique and interesting time. So now, minus the violin and cello music, I have an audience participation. So we are going to go through the Song of the Cedar Maker. I'm going to sing the verses, and you are going to help me with the chorus, which is simply axe, spud, saw, steel, trim, mark, cut, peel. You can just kind of chant it along. And it'll be bigger once you're done. Deep is the wall of the cedar, and tough is the take of the jack. But a man with a girl must feed her, and the fire must burn in the shack. Axe, stud, saw, steel, trim, mark, cut, peel. We tackled the world and shook her, a wench with an eye for hate. We winked at the woods and took her for better in bunk and plate. Axe, stud, saw, steel, trim, mark, cut, peel. Man is a thing for labor, or what's the game of the trees? The saw is as good as the saber, and tallies are made with these. Axe, spud, saw, steel, trim, mark, cut, peel. Our talk ain't the regular Latin, but we cut to the cedar's core. Our mineral stands some batten, but we pay for our beans and more. Axe, spud, saw, steel, trim, mark, cut, peel. Tough is the take of the cedar, and rough is the lift of the jack. But a man with a wife must feed her, and the kettle must boil in the shack. Axe, spud, saw, steel, trim, mark, cut, peel. A chew for the church and nation, we work and the scale is right. Sweat be our soul's salvation, and freedom is Saturday night. Whack, crack, chip, strip, zim, zow, zip, zip, axe, spud, saw, steel, chop, mark, cut, peel. All right, good job. And this is a picture that Ivan took at Camp Kijik, which was here somewhere around Cross Village, and it shows a woman, and she's probably a laundress. You can see some laundry hanging in the background there. So thank you for joining in there. So another part of this Mackinac thing is especially later on. First of all, he has some poems about some of these Mackinac personalities, if you will, that also spent time here in Harbor Springs. But then he also wrote a series of articles for History Magazine in 1926. They were quite lengthy descriptions of each of these people. And what he tried to do here, he mentions, to be direct, I wish my state could know more of the pioneers who seem to have given much and still remain unsung and expected to remain so. Among these, it seems to be Alexander McGulpin, Alexander Gilbault, and Andrew Blackbird stand out in strong virtues, marked talent, and permanent foresight of citizenship. They were contemporary and lived to my time of youth and sufficient maturity, I hope, for appreciation. What they went through to reach the poise and wisdom of their advanced years, I can but surmise from what they came to as I saw it. So that's him describing why he did this. And he mentions that his family came on the Erie Canal when it opened 100 years ago, because he was writing this in the mid-1920s. So the first personality here is Alex McGulpin. And right before this presentation, I was looking some things up online and saw that there's a picture of him with perch in his hand in the bay here at Harbor Springs somewhere. So I don't know where that picture is. Beth probably has it somewhere. But here's a couple little lines from Alex McGulpin. It's all faith, he said to the priest. Every morning for 80 years, the sun come up in the east. She's coming up tomorrow, I believe. I got my kindling to build fire tomorrow. It's all faith, Father. And there's another little tale. When asked idly by some friend the secret of long life and good health, he answered that he always made it a rule to get up at 12 o'clock at night and eat one pie and smoke a pipe. And he was not the first great man who answered unanswerable questions by indirection and sometimes a la Rabelais, which is eat, drink, and be merry. So he's quite a character. He loved the man, and they lived right down the street from one another. So you look on the census records, and you see the Swift family and the McGulpin family are just a few houses apart. He mentioned that he would go to school in one direction, and Alec McGulpin would go to work in the other direction, and they would just chit-chat, and he just really loved his association with them. The McGulpins were a long Mackinac family. This is his brother. This is Alec's brother, Benjamin McGulpin. The family first came to Mackinac Island right about when the Americans arrived in 1796. They were of Scotch ancestry on their father's side and of French-Canadian and Odawa ancestry on their mother's side. You can go to Mackinac Island and visit the McGulpin House, which their father William McGulpin had. He was a baker for some time. He purchased that in 1819. The McGulpin Point Lighthouse is also named after the family because the point is named after the family. And it was built in 1869. There was only one keeper of that lighthouse, and it wasn't actually a McGulpin, but the point of land is named after them. Why? So, at Mackinac, when the British abandoned the fort on the mainland and went over to the island, everyone had to move. They burned what was left, they moved what they could, and some people complained that they had to leave valuable property on the mainland, and they basically wanted recompense. So one of those was Robert Campbell, who built a sawmill east of Mackinac City, and that's where I work. We've reconstructed Robert Campbell's mill. It was a plot of 640 acres. Another was the McGulpins, who had another farm. There's two private claims on the mainland. That one and the McGulpins farm in McGulpin Point. So those were the two families that maintained their very first foothold of kind of living as a settlement after the fort was gone from this spot. And McGulpin Point Lighthouse is an Emmett County place, and you can visit that as well. Actually, around the outside, they've got quite a bit about the McGulpin family on some of the signage and so forth. The second person we'll take a look at is Alexander Gilbault. A common man was Père Gilbault, so will the townsmen say, a sodden leaf left by the snow upon the summer way. A relic of the older time, he crooned of moldy years, unknown to fame of good or crime, and sleeps unmourned of tears. And this the tribute of the world to labor's humbler men, a thing the jesting winds of whirl on earth and off again. No mausoleum marks his grave, no will divides his gold, no pension soothes a whimpering slave, his office none will hold. His tomb is but the earth he trod, his wealth the poet's heart, his gift a love for man and God, his post the honest part. A common man was Père Gilbault, and so the world must say, a sodden leaf left by the snow upon the summer way. He was a character, and Ivan wrote extensively about him. One of the things he did during his Mackinackers talks that was very popular at the time is he spoke in French-Canadian dialect. And I, just with the 21st century sensibility, will not attempt that. So he grew up, he was 3 years old when the Battle of Little Bighorn was fought. He just is an entirely different worldview, concept of time, what was happening and what was appropriate and so forth. But the audiences loved it. And this guy had lots to do. He pulled out a knife and showed how young Ivan, how the Indians would scalp someone. And just joked around with them. You imagine this old, charismatic man spinning his stories, and Ivan just soaking them up when he was a young lad. So this is Dearborn Independent in July 10th, 1926. And that's the only depiction we have of Père Gilbault, probably just fabricated, but it's nice to have something, because I couldn't figure out any picture of him. The family stayed around, and they are buried in Lakeview Cemetery. This is when his grandson passed away. The passing of Garrett Gilbault, 74, in Petoskey in 1937, brought to close the life of a member of Harbor Springs' first white family. Mr. Gilbault suffered a stroke in his home in Petoskey. His father and grandfather, Alec Gilbault Sr. and Alec Gilbault Jr., were sent here 75 or 80 years ago by the United States government to interpret the Indian, or to do what?
Instruct.
To instruct the Indians in the use of building tools. They were carpenters for the Indian mission, for the Mackinac, the Grand Traverse mission in this case. The first church in Petoskey, now in Mackinac State Park, was built by the Gilbaults. The first Alec Gilbault lived to the age of 110 years, according to old residents of this region. The second Alec Gilbault, which is the one that Ivan knew, Garrett's father, not grandfather, lived to be 86. And the third, Alec, Garrett's brother, was killed when his truck was struck by a train at the foot of State Street in Harbor Springs a number of years ago. So that won't happen today because the trains don't go there anymore. And the Gilbault home stood for many years on the property owned by the Little Harbor Club.
Really?
So that is Garrett's headstone in Lakeview Cemetery. The last person we'll talk about also has many Mackinac connections and also is associated with the Little Traverse Indian Mission. It's Andrew J. Blackbird. If you'd like to learn more about his life, you can go across the street or downstairs. So we'll just talk briefly about him, and especially Ivan's perception of him. Of course, his father was also named Blackhawk and was the chief of the tribe. He wrote a book in 1887, The History of the Ottawa and Chippewa Indians of Michigan. He was very highly educated. He went to the normal school in Ypsilanti and just was the postmaster here in Harbor Springs. And is just fascinating details about Native life from a Native perspective from his book, and very beloved. By the time 1887 rolls around, his health was already failing quite severely, and he ended up going blind and deaf, and I'll talk about the end of his life here in a moment. So when he did pass away in 1908, this huge article appeared in the Detroit News that was written by Ivan, and illustrated by him up there at the top. The one is not. But Michigan lost a good Indian when Chief Blackbird died. So he wrote poems about the Indian perspective, evidently talked to Chief Blackbird as well, and really respected him for many reasons. So this is part of his 1926 article, The Mackinackers in Michigan History Magazine. So he had these three main articles that appeared in 1926. And here's just a couple of short snippets from it. His life is a story of perseverance, adventure, romance, and the achievements against the severest odds. He was a good man, a worthy citizen, and a loyal friend to his persecuted fellows. Always a holy man, gentle, well-poised, meek and sincere, he may safely be called a prophet, a poet, a philosopher. Though his early dreams were far from realized, to the last he was still the idealist and seeker of knowledge. And I've learned that Andrew J. Blackbird passed his final years at the Emmett County Poor Home, which is literally within view of my house. And that's where he was buried originally. And when the highway went through, those 8 graves were exhumed and brought to Harbor Springs. So he's buried here in Harbor Springs, and there's a marker in the cemetery here. So I was quite surprised that he spent his final days with, I kept seeing on Google Maps the Emmett County Poor Farm Cemetery in my neighbor's field. I'm like, that's not a cemetery. What's going on here? And then digging, I finally found it out and then realized that that Blackbird was there across the street. We could have waved to each other. So, America's woodland poet. Now we're entering kind of a new phase of Ivan's career and his life. His books were successful. He had a couple of good printings. And his father ends up dying in this next kind of phase of his life at quite a young age. On May 24th, 1912, this is his headstone in the local cemetery. He literally died with his surveying tape in his hand at Burt Lake, which is also a view of our house on our back hill. John Swift, age 66 in Harbor Springs, fell dead from apoplexy while in company with his son, Ivan Swift, a young author from Detroit. Mr. Swift, who had resided in Emmett County since 1888, is survived by his widow and 4 sons, and it lists them all there. And Mrs. P.L. Thompson of Grand Ledge is a daughter. The family formerly lived in Wayne County. That's right about the same time he found the Chippewa Cove Woods artist colony in 1915. It's land that his father had purchased. It was called Government Lot, and that is piece of land next to the lakeshore, which made the edge rough, so you didn't have your square rectangular survey. This is right along the edge of the lake, but he bought these acres right in that government lot, and I'll show you the map of it here. It was surveyed and platted by Ivan. The association was incorporated in 1916, so he could have this little haven for artists to come. And this one advertisement I found of it: when you dream of a northern Michigan home in the virgin timber on the beautiful shore of Lake Michigan, then think of Chippewa Cove and write Ivan Swift, Harbor Springs, Michigan. So here's how he describes it. Chippewa Cove Woods, an art colony across the village, is the object of Mr. Swift's chief interest. And then that's the loft, which is his cottage. He says of the following: I'm carrying out an idea of my father's in the fostering of Chippewa Cove Woods. Here, painters and writers and others who want to do some type of creative work gather. There on the shore of Lake Michigan, we work and dream. But rarely do we personally meet in social intercourse, and then usually on the path to the well or on the beach in the evening. Generally, we all desire the same thing: solitude. The individual's unadulterated idea pays the best per line. Oh, that's fun. All right, so here's a map of that area, and that tiny little square or triangle right there is Chippewa Cove Woods. That road going, it looks like it goes right into it, is oh darn, it just left me. No, Wormwood. It's Wormwood. It doesn't go through all the way anymore like that. It just kind of trickles out. But on the right side of it, it's still an actual road. And here's the plot that Ivan drew up. So it's funny that at least 3 of the brothers did some surveying, so they must have spent time with their father. He was with his father when he passed, and he was just busy doing everything. It shows little parks in there: an architect's park, a painter's park, and you can also see the sign today, and also the streets that are named after the brothers and various native names inside the little development as well. And here's a picture of, if you want to be inspired, I understand the owner of his house is here today. You can't get better than that. No wonder he was inspired. No wonder he was great. I'd like to see your poetry next, because that's just such a gorgeous.
A lot of pressure.
So he was inspired to build upon that. He's really gathering a reputation now. He's become more and more known. He publishes a second book, The Blue Crane and Shore Songs, in 1918. It includes some new items. One of these is Along the Harbor Shore. I like the days of northern spring. That sounds familiar, doesn't it? When leaves emerge, the bud. The birches turn tender green and maple blossoms blood. A sail is golden in the sun against the purple hill. A gull is high on silent wing, the swallow's never still. Where westing sun and fog are met, along the harbor shore, an aged fisher reels a net and mutters primal lore. He is not of the spring of life, yet we find equal cheer. He that the old ship weathered through, I that the new may clear. Isn't that nice? So the 1920s are kind of rough for the Swift family. Jenny Swift dies in 1920. His brother Thorne dies 2 years later in 1922, and his brother Henry dies 2 years later in 1924. And then Burge dies in, I think, 1939. He becomes active with the Michigan Audubon Society, which I really love. And their simple little typed out newsletter in January of 1924 says, Ivan Swift of Harbor Springs has 35 acres in Emmett County, a thick virgin timber fronting Lake Michigan and isolated by an 80-foot bluff. Here live the Chippewa Cove Woods Colony, artists and naturalists. They have so spread the religion of protection that the neighboring woodland for several miles around is particularly sanctuary. This was a list of private nature sanctuaries in Michigan, and his is listed in there. And also at that time, especially in 1914, you've heard of Arbor Day, right? Founded in the 1890s or 80s. And in 1914, a lot of states around that time were expanding it to be Arbor and Bird Day. So in Michigan, that's when that was created, and the Michigan State Bird was voted on, and all kinds of great fun things happened. A number of Ivan's poems appeared in the Michigan Audubon Society newsletter. And I've been a birder since I've been 10 years old. My dad got us into it, and he writes about a swallow on a telegraph wire, the hummingbird, a grosbeak in the garden, and even the seagull, which was from To a Seagull by Ivan Swift here. And their goal was 1,000 members for a quarter century in 1929. So this is 25 yet. But he became very involved. He would write letters to editors. He would just become really a proactive supporter of conservation in any way he could. In 1926, and this is where I first found out about him, this map and guide of Mackinac Island was published by George N. Fuller and his daughter Florence. So George Fuller was the editor for Michigan History Magazine. Ding, ding, ding. And he was very involved with the Michigan Historical Commission. And his daughter Florence is really the one that did most of the work on this, although she's not credited there. George has a letter, which Beth has in her collection here, writing to Ivan and saying what his idea for a cover might be, and wanting some help. And Ivan recommended Lester Mange, M-A-N-G-E, as the artist. So he said, I would be gladly inspect it. So he inspected the sketch, which is also in Beth's collection here. You can see L.M., Lester Mange, is the artist of this. But Ivan took a look at it, and then his poem appeared on the back. So his poem is Home. In the evening after the rain, at home with the north and the trees, I turn from the world again and find me a world in these. The glories of continents seen and all the wars have ears have heard are lost in a garden's green, the chirp of a nested bird. Well, that's great. Who did that? It was Ivan. So it's the last kind of major work. The thickest one comes out in 1926. This is an anthology of the different poems that was published in his previous versions. It's got many different works in there, and it's just a wonderful little book. I bought a copy of it, and also of the Blue Crane and Shore Songs, which I got over here. The Trail Road is one of the poems that appears in there, and I even ran across the name of the woman who did the artwork for the lettering on this. Her name's Maud. I can't think of her last name. But the Trail Road, which you may know already, is the road that went along the shore from Harbor Springs up to Cross Village. Where the new state highway was put in, which is State Road, it cut straight up to Cross Village and kind of deleted that long, picturesque view along the shore. But as I'm sure you and thousands of other people drive that route, a beautiful route along the shore, here's how Ivan described it. The road that goes to my home is my road and my care. And they who take a new road have not my heart to share. I know its long and short faults, and other faults as dear, and variant and hazardous go fit a man's career. to fit a man's career. It winds across the Mill Creek and up the Wasson Hill, and after earnest rain falls, it has a wash to fill. A wall is laid to old walls to hold the hurdle bend, horseshoe bend, and on the devil's elbow, the god of carts defend. You just can't rhyme with horseshoe. But half the good of my road is more than half we see. And Indians and old men and ghosts of men agree. The road that leads the trailway is something to remind. And they who travel straight roads will leave their roads behind. I love that. And it's in the last version of, it's printed elsewhere, but this kind of fancy version is in the last version of Faggots of Cedar. You probably recognize this porch. This is the Grand Hotel. So the following year, after that, his book and the Mackinac Island publication comes out, the Michigan Authors Association has a meeting on Mackinac Island, where Ivan Swift is one of the presenters. They at the Grand Hotel from July 28th to 29th, 1927. The previous year, they actually met in Harbor Springs. They called it the Naples of the North at that time, which is funny. So Mr. Ivan Swift took for his theme the opportunities inherent in the genuine and almost untouched materials which Michigan affords for song and story. Illustrating from some writings of his own, which he called Episodes in Michigan History, Mr. Swift gave convincing proof as his theory with these sketches of life in the early lumbering camps and among the adherents of the famous King Strang of Beaver Island. So it's right out there, and you have to write about it, you can see it, right? And who wrote this? Is George N. Fuller actually wrote this article. This appeared, and it's even got a copy of the trail road there in 1927 in the Dearborn Independent. Again, we saw the coureur-de-bois story printed in there as well. Here's a portrait of Ivan. Several different artists made portraits of him throughout his life. He published some smaller publications, kind of summarizing his thoughts, philosophies, religion, the Green Bench, Writs, and Opinions. This is one I purchased. This is on the table over here. You can see the little lizard there in Harbor Springs, and this picture is literally on tissue paper, and it's done by Paul Honoré, who actually did all of the murals on the outside of the Midland Courthouse. So I was very familiar with him, of these murals of Native Americans and lumbermen, and worked with Herbert Dow a lot in Midland, and did this. He was friends with Ivan Swift. He did this portrait of Ivan. And 9 lives in letters by the years. It takes letters from 9 lives throughout all these years and kind of summarizes them in one volume. It's a small volume limited to 150 copies. I did not get my hands on one before this presentation. Although I did see a little bit of a review of it and a little description. 9 lives and letters by the years from the cabinets of Ivan Swift and the files of the Green Bench, which is a new thing he's calling his shop here, issued by the Green Bench Shop, Harbor Springs, Michigan. A volume as unique as its author. To appreciate, one must read. A book of documented frustration, the author calls it, in his foreword. This volume is not paged, but it contains 150 pages, covering dates from 1880 to 1930. Each copy is numbered and autographed by the author. There is no index, but the author suggests, quote, when frustrated, look inside. There's no index to life. Has the mantle of Fra Albertus fallen upon these shoulders? May we say, while the title has a feline suggestion, the contents are not catty. They remind of the brown thrasher, which delights to haunt the wilds and dart in and out of brush heaps. A book of fruitful ideas, poetically expressed. And he talks about what's your religious philosophy? And he talks about how it changes day to day, almost. But he was really a humanist, someone who really looked at the love of nature and of people and took it at face value, and definitely was connected to these things on a much deeper and broader scale. He published a small book, which was a fiction, a novel, in 1931. He never did publish that Mackinackers book. Really ended up in Michigan History magazine and other places. This is a list of all the articles he wrote for Michigan History magazine. The Indian contains this picture of Cross Village, or Middle Village rather, that he painted. And he has a great description, again, of him going with buggy maker or something to a primitive Indian village, which very well could have been this. And the maker says, "Is this all there is?" He says, it's all that you see, basically. It's just like, what can you see? You know, if you can see the deeper levels of it, there's much more than what meets the eye. Oh, here he is. So this picture with fishing nets at Mackinac actually appeared with the House of Autobiography, which is a great long description of Olaf's cabin and his living with chipmunks and eagles perching on the roof and all these wonderful different descriptions. And very open architecture. He talked about the Ojibwe and Japanese styles melding together, the Ojibwe Japanese, and it leads me. He wrote a nice poem about Japan as well, which leads me to believe that he did travel there, but I don't know for sure when he might have done so. Several of his paintings were owned by the Detroit Institute of Arts for a time. The first one he gave to the Detroit Institute of Arts. The second one, a Michigan home, he traded back his old painting, and they kind of accepted a donation. And then Farmington in 1938 was distributed or displayed at the 1939 World's Fair, but none are currently in the collection of the Detroit Institute of Arts today. His partial list of landscape paintings that Beth has is just full, two-sided, more than 75 works, and that's just partial list, he said, of many, many different works. Here's one that was on exhibit in the 1980s. This has appeared in a book of the exhibition, Cove Beach, 1928. It's this kind of rustic, kind of rusty-looking scene on purpose. It's not a washed-out image. And they said it kind of evoked the pine needles and the scent of the forest and so forth. And the sunset. We're closing up here, but this is a fun little bit, which you may have seen. Newspaper article. Tales of the Deep. The heavy snowfall of the past 2 weeks has brought out its share of tall stories. Ivan Swift tells the tale of the traveler from Mackinac City to Petoskey, who sighted a farmer measuring the snow with a bamboo fish pole. Asked how deep the snow really was, the farmer replied, "I don't know, and I don't give a darn. I'm looking for my cow barn." January 5th, 1939. I found another poem he wrote in Detroit shortly before his death about a janitor of a school. It was just delightful. Poem is very much a sense of humor and very charismatic. I found an interview with a woman. She was involved in the artist scene in Detroit, and she just said, Ivan Swift was such a wonderful thing to look upon. Like, he was hot. Like, he was very, charismatic, and just the bee's knees, basically. Just everything about him was attractive, and he drew this circle around him. People wanted to be associated with him, and loved his. He was a storyteller, and he gathered those stories and told them with much glee for all the years of his life. So he died October 5th, 1945. He had a room in a hotel in Detroit that he spent most of his winters at. He also, again, went down south many times, but a small fire broke out in an adjacent room. And he rushed out into the hallway and discovered it was nothing too serious, and turned around and collapsed of a heart attack and died right at the door of his hotel room. So the excitement of the event initiated his heart attack. So he was buried here in Harbor Springs. His brother Marcus was the last brother left at that point, but he died 1 month later in November of 1945. So then only their sister was the last Swift of that generation left here in Michigan, or in Harbor Springs. So, in summary, how do you summarize it? I thought I'd just use his poem, the poet vagrant from early in his life, from 1908, but talks about on the event of his demise. Were I to die this hour, or some near day, be stricken quick upon the way I've trod. Say not, 'tis sad the youth has passed away, bereft of fortune and so far from God. Say not in pity that I might have had the gift and favor of the rich and great, but that mischosen insolence forbade my fellows warning of a hapless fate. Grieve not that I have spent my years in a dream, and drifted listless as the vagrant brook, have sought me substance in the things that seem, and left to earth the semblance of a book. What though I have not where to lay my head, nor marble weight upon my body's grave, of this I make no moan when I am dead, and you possess the worth I failed to save. So be it I am soon forgot of men, and laid in alien soil by stranger hands. The pines above my head will mourn me then, and waves intone my requiem on the sands. I'm sorry. Say rather this: he chose to make his friends in wood and field, with bird and flower and tree. Began his labor where our labor ends, and saved the faith in immortality.